All right. Hello, I'm Tiffany Hopkins. You're listening to Beyond, and I have a wonderful guest for all of you to meet today. Her name is Tracy Rainwaters. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat.
Welcome. So, where are you in the world right now?
I am located in Western Washington State. I'm a California transplant, and my husband and I found ourselves up here moving during COVID, and we now have a horse farm in Western Washington full of many beloved animals.
Wow. What part of California? I just have to ask because I'm from there too.
Okay, yeah. So I was born in Southern California in LA, and I'm a chiropractor and an animal chiropractor. So I went to graduate school in the Bay Area and had a practice there for 20 years.
Wow.
So yeah,
What part of the Bay? Just, I'm.
primarily the East Bay. So Livermore, I did a stint in Marin, and then I met my husband, and he was living in Sonoma, and then we settled in the very north part of the East Bay, like in that whole Martinez, Orinda, Lafayette area. And that's where we were before we moved up here.
Okay.
So
That's great.
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your day today. What have you been up to?
It has been a beautiful and exciting morning. We're actually getting ready to go on a trip to Portugal at the end of the week. So it has been a morning full of making sure that the animals just stocking up on hay and bedding and all of the things, and really getting prepped for vacation and making sure the farm and everything here is set up for us to go.
Yes.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
How many animal beings do you have under your care?
Well, we currently, I always say, like, we just have three horses. Three is a lot.
That's a
It's
lot.
a lot. It's a lot to be caring for full time. We have a rescue bunny that I found on the side of the road a couple months ago. So little Bun Bun is a new addition to our little family. We have two beloved house cats, four ducks, and a dog that we got earlier this year as well.
Wow, sounds like quite,
So,
quite the household. And I just have one
yeah,
cat and one dog, and preparing to travel is one of
it's
my
so
least
much.
favorite things to do because of that. So I can
Yeah,
imagine. Thank you for being able to take this time today in that.
happy to do it.
So I think we've already kind of hinted at why I'm so excited to talk to you today because as people who have listened to this show for a while know, I am really into connecting. I'm a medium, yes, but I'm into
Mhm.
connecting with a lot more than just dead people. And that includes all beings, dead and living. And of course, it's really important to include our animal loved ones, the
Yeah,
animals of our natural world. And you do that. Tell me a
I
little
do
bit about
that.
it.
Well, I would say I actually tell people very openly, it's a part of my life that I never saw coming. I grew up an absolute horse crazy little girl. Like I cannot remember a time in my life just being completely enamored with horses. And I would say like the entirety of the animal kingdom. So much so that I decided to become a human chiropractor and do specialty training to be able to work on animals. And, in hindsight, like looking back, I think there was a part of me that always knew I was intuitive to a degree. I mean, I was definitely a highly sensitive little kid. I was not raised in a family that really fostered that or I think understood that in any way, shape, or form. But once I actually started working on horses professionally, I started to have this experience where I put my hands on their bodies and they would start showing me pictures of like what was actually going on the inside of their body. And I remember I had one client in particular. We kept our horses at the same barn, and I knew her really well. We were both into, spiritual stuff, so I knew she was a safe person for me to kind of open up about. And I'm like, and I just told her, I'm like, for some reason, I'm seeing images of this traumatic event happening with your horse, and she was able to completely confirm it.
Wow.
So that definitely piqued my interest in combination with I had had multiple intuitives in my 20s tell me that I was an animal communicator. And I remember thinking like, God, that would be so amazing if you could like talk to animals. And I'm like, there's no way I can do that. Like for some reason, I really put it in this category of like, you had to be like this really special person to be able to do that. And the way that I thought animal communication was going to work, like I thought I should just be able to walk into a barn and hear animals like voices in my head and
Right?
just, yeah, like have that sort of engagement.
Yeah.
So after I started seeing pictures with animals, I started just playing with like sending questions in my mind to the horses. And I would really just ask them about their bodies because I felt like that was a way that through my education and my training, I could motion palpate or talk to their humans and at least try and get some clarity. And I was not talking to my humans, to the human owners at all about, the animal communication aspect, but it really, I had this beautiful opportunity to speak to thousands and thousands of horses and really start to refine that skill of how intuition worked in my body and what that actually looked like. And then when I was 30, my mom was diagnosed with a very severe form of bone cancer. And on a whim, a friend of mine recommended that I go see a shaman. And, it was one of those things where I didn't really know anything about shamanism, but I felt this deep internal pull to go and have this experience. And it was like a completely alchemizing and life-changing experience for me in that all of my sensitivity in ways that I grew up thinking that there was something fundamentally wrong with me because I felt really sensitive and I didn't understand why people perceived the world, at least in a way that felt very different than what I did. It helped me kind of organize my intuitive abilities, and it just felt like a really confirming experience. So I went ahead and did a really intensive 2-year shamanic training program, really with the only intention of it being like a spiritual development practice for myself. And as we were learning how to do shamanic energy healings, I started to get really curious and I was wondering, I'm like, well, if you can do this for a human, like, can you do it for a horse? Because I feel like animals innately pick up so much of our energy and our emotional states and hold a lot of our energetic trauma.
Yeah.
Um, so I started like doing shamanic energy medicine for people and their horses, and that just kind of flowed into kind of on the side doing some animal communication work, which very quickly, when we moved from California to Washington, it forced me to really step back my practice. So I still go to California and work a little bit, but it gave me this freedom and the time. And I really decided that I wanted to expand this aspect of my business. And the part that I didn't see coming was that doing really traditional animal communication turned into a form of channeling that I can only describe, and I can't really tell you how or why this started to happen, but really being able to speak to the soul aspect of an animal. And I started getting more and more animals that were either preparing to leave their physical body or had already transitioned. And in 2021, I lost a very beloved horse of mine. We had to euthanize her, and she's buried here on our property. And that experience of her, like hearing her tell me so clearly, like when she was ready to go, how she wanted that process to roll out, and then really showing me like her energetic engagement with the energetic grids of our land, and how she was working through our property and her energy, and like how that energetic connection, was still present and working here, has been like a complete, reframe for me, like on death.
Mm.
And really, I feel like animals are now taking me on this journey of understanding like the soul's process of unraveling from the physical body and what that can be, how they energetically actually merge back into our energy systems when they pass. And I feel like it's extended me or gifted me like such a deep feeling of peace around what it means to die. And I just always hope, that, when people come to me for that type of work, it's always my hope that it gives them a lot of peace, around having to make a really hard decision or even just the grief over losing a beloved animal.
Absolutely. It is, as a pet owner, I would say it's probably
Mhm.
one of the hardest things we have to deal with is
Yeah.
their loss. And, I hadn't planned to talk about this, but it's interesting you bring up how having that communication channel with these animal loved ones is so incredibly soothing. And I've found that in
Yeah.
my practice with people. And I've also read studies that have been done that have shown that people who practice mediumship are better able to manage grief and
Mhm.
overall have a more positive outlook on life because they have found this, way of communicating and an understanding that death is
Mhm.
different than we might have thought, right?
Yeah.
And I think part of it has to do with how much we're faced with death and
Mhm.
dying and loss. And
Yeah.
it kind of forces you to be like, all right, I'm gonna look into this and understand it and see what it means. But also our relationship shifts because we start
Yeah.
to say, oh, this is a change that we need to navigate, and it's a difficult
Mhm.
change, but it isn't the end. And
Exactly.
that's just so different than what the rest of our society and our experience tells us.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I feel our Western society, like, I don't feel like we have accepted or really open to grief. I think grief is something that really scares people. And it's often this feeling I've had people tell me, they're like, I feel like if I really surrender to my grief, I'll never come out of it. Like it feels so big, and so enormous that if I really surrender to that, like that there will never be a way out. So hopefully this helps anybody who's listening, but I've had the animals really talk about grief is actually a necessary part,
Mhm.
not only in losing someone that you love, but it's meant to be a very heart-opening experience. It's not meant to be something that shuts our heart down. It is, it is proof of love. And it's something that's meant to flow through us. And the animals have shown me, like, when they leave their physical form, I can only describe it as there's like this foundational core of their spiritual self that, lives on and goes somewhere else. But to me, it always looks like these golden fireflies of energy that actually meld back into the humans and the people that they've loved. They actually connect down into the earth and that they actually energetically become part of us. And there is something in that grief process when we sit in it in a very authentic way, meaning that when we allow the tears to flow,
Mhm.
when we allow ourselves to acknowledge how much love is there, that grief actually acts as like a soldering in process. It kind of melds their energy with ours. And when we remember them and think of how much that we love them or all of the gifts that they brought into our life, it is like this energetic illumination within our own being. So, on one hand, we could say, like, yes, everything is connected, but to me, it looks like a more intimate experience of there is an energetic aspect of them that stays inside of us, that it stays anchored into who we are as a being. And there's something in this grief process that opens our hearts and it kind of opens up our energy systems and allows this process to go through. And where things get tricky is when we're either in denial of grief, which actually causes us to stay in a stuck state. There's something in that heart chakra, that heart center, that it's like there's like a little bit of a gridlock. So I can't say my human mind necessarily understands all of it, and yet there's something in what I see, and there's something to the feeling of all of it that to me feels like very authentic and true.
What you
So.
just said about the connecting to everything, but there's also you the way exactly you said that was really fascinating to me because I do think everything is connected and I feel that very much, but you just brought this more subtle point that some connections are stronger than others and it's not a
Yeah.
uniform thing. And
Mhm.
that um is such a beautiful reminder and that we grow our connections with certain beings and certain places and times and whatever it is. And that that stands over our whole experience and we can continue to grow them. And that's one of the things that I tell people when they're in a state of grief and starting to figure out how to live with it for a while,
Mhm.
is what something you mentioned of remembering the one we've
Mhm.
lost and spending time
Yeah.
thinking about them and doing the things that you loved doing with them. And and kind of talking to them in your mind and imagining you're having a conversation. What else do you recommend for people who are facing grief and maybe struggling because they're not able to really let it, emerge, or they feel like they've been in it for too long? There's a lot of kind of cultural expectations and what's appropriate, and it's different for everybody. Do you have
Yeah.
any other, I don't know, helpful tips you've given people?
Yeah, I really encourage, whether it's with a loved one or an animal, that we create an altar or a sacred space, whether it's in our home or on our property somewhere. It is actually a practice from the shamans that I think is a really beautiful way of allowing us to take all of this love and reverence that we're holding within that actually may feel like too much. It may feel almost oppressive within our system. And when we give them a place to live somewhere, so whether we put pictures, little artifacts, or things that remind us of them, it gives us a beautiful place to kind of honor them and to come to. So I think for us, especially as humans, like we are so visual, like actually having a place that's sacred and meant just for that, can be deeply helpful. I also encourage people, especially with their animals, continue to talk to them. I think there's really this sense of, and I think to me it's a different thing. Like, yeah, it's actually 100% okay. Like, and it's very normal to honor the physical aspect of this being that is no longer here. Like, there is day-to-day rituals and routines, and just their presence is gone. But really being open to, there is an aspect of them that is living inside of you. If you have this beloved animal that sleeps with you every night, it's like, well, in a spiritual sense, they're still there. So encouraging people to talk to them or write letters to them to have some way for that energy. I feel like energy is meant to flow and it's meant to have a direction. And when it doesn't have a direction, it can often feel like it's just swirling inside of us. So again, having an altar or a sacred space that's for either the human or the animal where you can go and either have conversations with them or just go sit in their preference and in their presence and have an emotional experience and an emotional reaction that can be really helpful, or at least giving a voice to how you feel and giving it direction. Um, I find there's just this important flow of energy. So just giving it a direction and an outlet can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's such a great way to put it, is separating out the physical and the spiritual, because that is what has happened, right? Is
Yeah.
now this being, whether it's a person or an animal, Sylvester's been one. I don't know if
Yeah.
you could hear him. He was jumping around and messing with stuff, and I was
That's
wondering
so
if he
cute.
could actually come. So my cat has joined us in the living. But
Yeah.
when they've passed over, their physical body is separated from their energetic body, and so it is us learning, who still are in physical body, learning to um, have relationships with the two different parts of the being that are
Yeah.
now separated. And we're really shifting the relationship into an altar or into a physical space where we've, a gravestone, a place that we've left for them, or designated for them. And then the energetic relationship is still in that physical place we've set, but it's also can be anywhere now.
Yeah.
And so learning to navigate that new or changed energetic and spiritual
Yeah.
relationship is it's a great, thank you for separating those two out, because I
Yeah.
we need to remember.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's and grief is complex, and I feel like obviously we know like there are different stages to grief and my mare that I lost, it's been a little over 3 years, I still have these moments and they're getting less and less and I would say the ups and downs are getting easier, but I still have these moments of like just missing her physical presence. Like I miss the Winnie that I would get when I'd walk in the barn and just she was one of the most loving, like motherly figures like I've had. So it's like I miss that. And when I feel that, I think it's also really important, like I acknowledge, like there is her physical presence that I miss. And I really try and take a moment to stop and honor her in that moment. And through the space of my mind, and this is something anybody can do with their animals, is just whatever you're feeling, whatever you want them to know, you can imagine the words in your mind like just almost like moving a file on your computer, like you're going to drag and drop. So you can like take those words from your mind and imagine them going into the mind of your animal. And if your animal's passed on, you can just imagine it going to their energy. That is like one of the most honest, kind of simple forms of animal communication. It's just that intention, that telepathic intention. So what's helped me to not get stuck in the sadness is to like stop myself and honor. It's like, hey, I really miss you in this moment. And I hold an image of her in my mind of when she was healthy and vital. And I just tell her that I love her and like how grateful I am. And it's like, I miss you in this moment, but thank you for the gift that you brought into my life. And that alone brings me so much peace. So I think also, like, to me, that's just another version of like allowing that energy to flow in a direction instead of just allowing it to churn inside of you to kind of stew, like on how much you miss something, but to actually give it away up and out.
Yep.
It's like having that conversation. I'm sure we've all had moments in our life where there are things that have been left unsaid with somebody, and you're like, oh, I wish I could go back. And I'm like, we have that with our animals, if with anybody, even with people who have passed on, the conversation, we may not get the feedback in the same way, but that energy and those words and that love can still come up and out of us to the beings that we intend it to.
Absolutely. And what I love that I just heard as you were explaining that, which that little process, thank you so much for sharing that. And what I heard you do is you
Yeah.
switched to um second person. So you said, I miss you to your mare, not I miss her. And I find
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest shifts, both in mediumship, just in strengthening a connection if I'm doing a reading, but in my grief process with my animals, I get stuck. When I get stuck, it's usually because I'm like, I miss her. I miss her. But
Hmm.
I'm thinking of my dog. So,
Yeah.
and it turns into this thing where they're separated. And if we turn it
Yeah.
into talking directly to the beloved,
Hmm.
it becomes more of a communication. And I think
Yeah.
that, yeah,
And
you
it's
did that naturally. It's a beautiful example.
thank you for pointing that because again, it happens below my awareness, but it is honoring the eternal. That eternal, energetic thread that I think we're all like in this cosmic web of life. I keep like getting this like impulse to like talk about something, but this idea of, I think it's also important to acknowledge, the love that we feel for our animals. I've often have people say, like, I'm grieving the loss of my beloved animal more than the loss of like a human presence in my life. And so often our animals, um, it's amazing how often animals actually come back in different bodies throughout the course of our life. So a beloved dog could be a cat in your life later, or some beloved childhood pet can come back to us in our adult life. But more and more, I'm getting animals too who are telling their humans, it's like, I am actually like a spiritual guide for you. So it's like we have this relationship, and for a big chunk of your life, like sometimes I need to leave this physical form because I can offer more help and guidance and support, in my etheric body versus the physical body. Um, but often that intense love, it is also animals gift us unconditional love, but often like I'm just seeing more and more that these animals are profound spiritual guides, angels in our life in the spiritual world who will drop into these lovely little four-legged bodies or very large four-legged bodies to steward us through different moments in our life. And sometimes that can feel, the love that we feel with that. It may not always be in our conscious mind that it's like you have this really intense spiritual connection as well. And sometimes they're in a spiritual form and they come in for a physical form for a period of time. So I find sometimes just for people like the acknowledgement of that. And it's like, yeah, this loss feels really huge
Mhm.
because it may be a small cat body, but the spiritual form of that may have this much larger presence in your life. So,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
I think it's a symptom of some of the issues we have in our culture where we don't value everything. Every relationship is kind of underneath the importance of human relationships. Our
Yeah.
relationship with nature, our relationship with um, history, with the future, with nature, with food, whatever it is, nothing is as important as with people. And
Mhm.
of course, we are people, human relationships are incredibly important, but the other relationships we have are really important too. And
Yeah.
I love what you said because sometimes our relationships with animals are just as important or more important than certain humans. And it's about the relationship we had and the connection and
Yeah.
us valuing like having allowing ourselves to value what it is for us in our life rather than
Hmm.
assigning a specific value based on the being's type or species, right?
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Yeah. And, I just feel like, yeah, I feel like there's this interesting shift happening in humanity, and it's happening in a wide variety of ways, but I really feel like the pathway forward for us, and it's not just in survival, but I really feel like embracing joy. And that's something the horses keep talking about is joy and freedom. Like as humans, we lack joy and freedom, and therefore we don't actually understand how to gift our animals joy and freedom. And freedom isn't just running around doing whatever you want, but it's the freedom within your heart and the freedom within your being to be sovereign, to walk in the world in a really authentic way. And for me, I feel like until we can honor all of the beings that we see as less than us, and that's the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, it's Mother Earth, until we can see all of that as equal and reciprocal. And it's actually our job to steward that. It's not our job to be an authority over it. Uh, I think humanity's, I hate to say doomed, but it's like we're really limiting ourselves. And in so many ways, I am really confirmed that I think there's like this massive upswelling of people who may not necessarily understand how or why, but like their intuitive senses are coming online. Their desire to grow their own food and feel connected to the earth. To me, it's just imperative for our survival moving forward. And for us to actually survive with a very high quality of life. We have to start acknowledging that everything that we encounter is interconnected. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you for that. I agree
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. And I love that you brought joy into the equation because, it's such a rare thing these days, I feel like.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be because joy is in tiny moments and we can find it
Hmm.
everywhere. And I do find that my animal friends are really helpful in reminding me of all the joyful
Yeah.
moments. And they're one of the strongest um, places we have to find joy in because
Yeah.
everything that humans build is there's all sorts of wonderful attributes to it, but joy isn't always one of them. And so we
Yeah.
need these other connections to bring it back because we really need joy in our lives.
Yeah. It's been such an interesting thing that I've had to parse out for myself too. And it's like, happiness and joy are not the same thing.
That's
And
right.
I really, it's something I have to like stop myself and be like, happiness is sort of a fleeting in the moment thing. It can be very conditional on external factors. But joy is like this deeper thread of, for me at least, it means like peace. It means harmony. It's like this deep connection to like gratitude
Yeah.
and being able to love, everything that's rolling out in our life, even if it's not rolling out the way that we like. And it feels to me like an ever evolving thing. Like, I feel like joy should be something, it feels like so innate. Like, we should all just know what that means. And the more I talk to people about it, I feel like we all get a little sticky around, like, what does it actually mean to live a joyful life?
Mhm.
And I don't have all the answers to that, but I'm grateful for the animals, like, in pushing me towards, like, what actually brings your life joy? Um, and what does it mean to walk in the world in a way where you feel really free?
Ah, that's so
So,
true. They do provide this model for us. I watch like
mhm.
last night I was writing and I look at the cat and he's laying on his back with his paws in the air, like just making weird movements and just clearly enjoying being in a body and stretching and just I was just like, ah, yeah, that is it. Like he doesn't have there's nothing there, just him being
Mhm.
alive and getting to witness those moments
Yeah,
is such an important reminder for me that it can just happen spontaneously and for uh, even just a few moments, and that's
yeah.
a big part of what it is.
I mean, one of my it's just as you were talking, and I'm like, yeah, one of the things that really brings me to that place is when one of our cats naps on our bed all day. And some of the most connected moments that I've had are just laying on the bed with him, staring in his eyes, and just that shared moment of, I feel like those are the things I'll remember, like as I'm dying.
Mm.
It's like that beauty and that connection. And I'm like, God, how cool that we get to be in physical bodies and share this space right now. It kind of makes everything else in the world, I'm actually tearing up. It makes everything else in the world feel small, in comparison. And I just don't think, at least for myself, I'm just going to speak for myself, like I'm in my mid 40s now, and for so much of my life, I was so focused on what I could produce or what I could do that I'm like, even allowing myself those moments in the middle of the day just to like bask in the beauty of the world around us and the beings around us. I just don't think that's something that we often prioritize as important. And yet I think it is like the most the most important, aspects of life. It is kind of the point.
I agree. And
Yeah.
it is hard to make the space for it and to prioritize it and
Hmm.
to remember and recognize it and say, that is what I'm going for.
Yeah.
It's not a big thing. It's
Yep.
just this little tiny moment that
Yeah.
brings tears to my eyes. And you're reminding me, we talked a lot about grief and we're now we naturally float into joy. And I think that's an important reminder that these things are intrinsically connected. And if we don't
Yeah.
allow ourselves to have grief, then it's really hard to allow ourselves to have joy too. And this
Yeah.
is one of the challenges that we have to face in order to get to places of joy is a lot of times it comes through places of grief.
Yeah. Yeah. We cannot, I think our nervous systems, like our physiology, like we're not designed to stay stuck in one state. Um, and there is this, shamanic principle or this idea of like how important it is to have contrast in our lives.
Mm.
I think so much of us want homeostasis because it feels safe and comfortable. And yet that's not actually the point. It's like we have to know grief. We have to understand that, there are aspects of anger that can be really sacred and all of these things, I do feel like grief and joy live on an opposite end of a spectrum. And, you know, every emotion when it's worked through, I think in a really healthy way becomes, a sacred action. And that if we find ourselves wanting things to be too comfortable, it's like there is a reciprocal action of that can like create stagnation, in another direction. So yeah, grief is meant to be felt.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're really in the depths of it right now, and so I want to kind of bring us out gradually as we prepare to close the conversation. And what I want to kind of bounce to is strengthening the connection we have with our living animals. We just talked about it for a moment with watching them and the joy that
Hmm.
we have. And you also talked a little bit about how when you first started experiencing animal communication, you had a real shift in what you thought it was going to
Yeah.
be and what it was. And I
Hmm.
had a very similar experience. And I'd love
Yeah.
um, another just any little tidbits you have about what it's like to connect with your animals and with animals for people who are trying to experience it on their own.
Yeah, I mean, I firmly believe anyone can do animal communication. Now, I think for some, that pathway is already pretty open. Those intuitive senses are, there's a connection there, so it can be easier for some versus others. I think for me, that was the hardest thing is like, I thought everything would be a form of clairaudience.
Mhm.
And that's actually a skill. It's not a dominant form of intuition for me. Like, I very much get this deep knowing, which I think is actually incredibly common for people, but it's one for me, like one of the hardest to teach and to work with on people because it's like the information just sort of comes in and you don't know how you know it, you just sort of know. So I see imagery and I get feelings, and I've had to really refine more of the subtle intuitive senses for me, and that's a lot of that is hearing. Um, so yeah, like once I really started to understand, um, that like I'll see or I'll just sort of know something. And then I started like doing a lot of it with my eyes closed, and it feels like information will come. And to me, I always describe it, it's like these energetic threads in the universe. And if it's like if I can just lock in on one, like there's a tremendous amount of information that will come through that. Um, but yeah, I put so many limits on myself because I thought I should just be able to communicate in here. And I would see a lot, I would feel a lot of physical sensations in my body, and a lot of it was deep knowing. So I would encourage people, like if you feel stuck, around your intuition, or if you feel like you would love to communicate with your animal, but you're pretty convinced it's not happening, I would say some of those subtle things to look out for is like when you just know what your animal needs in a moment. And it may not be because you're looking at them, but you may just sort of know, oh, I know you need this right now. I'm like, that's actually, a form of animal communication. And our rational human mind, I think it's pretty normal. It's always going to want to talk us out of the intuitive information that comes towards us. I wish I had a really great technique or answer for that, other than you sometimes have to tell your monkey mind to go sit somewhere else for a while you do the work. Um, and I feel like it's also a place of like deep vulnerability and deep trust of just, this is absolutely a skill set to me. I always tell people it's a bit like learning a new language. Like it's a skill that you have to develop. It's like a muscle that has to be worked with. And like I always tell people, I promise if you kind of stick with it, like once you understand how information comes to your body, like things get going, I feel like pretty quickly. But I always kind of teach people, I'm like, usually intuitive information will have a feeling somewhere in your body too. So like even when I hear stuff, it doesn't necessarily sound like the thoughts in my mind. Like there's a different pacing to it. It's usually more direct and it's more clear and there's no emotion to it.
Mhm.
So just really letting people know
Hmm.
it comes in a wide variety of ways. So letting go of any preconceived idea of what you think it should look like is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had such a similar experience, and my big aha moment, well, there was lots of them, but one of them was like, oh, this is happening all the time. And I just didn't know where it was coming from or what it was. And I thought it was a lot of different things. And so it's
Mhm.
been really interesting to, over time, with practice and with confirmation from others, which is part
Yeah.
of the learning process, is having another person. And whatever, if your contact is an animal, then you still need another person, like trying to find someone who can help you confirm things. And
Yeah.
learning over time, yeah, what's coming up in the body and what it means.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's quite a process. And I agree. I
Yeah.
mean, of course, I think everybody can do this. And um
Yeah.
yeah, it just takes a little time and effort.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really do feel like I do teach animal communication. And some people who have been, especially when they've been on a spiritual path for a while, they've done some personal development work. Like sometimes that pathway is just a little more open because it's like that road has been primed and cleared a little bit. But yeah, I feel like we are all intuitive beings and our body really is our vessel. So it's like really, I think it can be such a mental reframe for some people. Yeah, I see a lot of people that have the curiosity, but like really understanding that your body isn't just a physical thing, it's an energetic vehicle of sensing, perceiving, and knowing, and like learning how to use that in a way that's really authentic to you. But
Absolutely.
yeah.
Ah, I love it. We could talk all day, but I know
Yeah.
you have packing to get back to, so I want to wrap things up. And how can people find you if they want to take one of your classes or learn more or have a session? Where else
Yeah.
can we get to you?
The best ways, well, my website, which is just tracyrainwaters.com. And then you can also find me on Instagram. It's just at dr.rainwaters. And those are my two main ways of connecting at this moment in time.
Great. We'll put those in the show notes as well. And thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for being here. What an awesome conversation. And I
Thank you
hope
so
to
much.
have another one soon.
Likewise.
All right.
Thank you.